Here's your news for July 4th, 2020. And your headlines for today include, yet another WWE wrestler Vince McMahon gave up on. WWE officials very furious about leaked result. Why Vince McMahon left WWE Raw television tapings early. Champion vs. Champion match booked for next week's Raw. Who is responsible for the infamous Jeff Hardy Sheamus segment on Smackdown? Mysterious life of Mr. Wrestling 2 revealed. Renee Young's health update. Current WWE wrestler is planning to retire. Drew McIntyre claps back at Conor McGregor for calling out Vince McMahon, and more. We're kicking off today's Independence Day episode with news from Extreme Rules, as there's a lot planned for the Swamp Fight match between Braun Strowman and Bray Wyatt. According to Wrestling Inc., the non-title match will be a cinematic encounter, and the company have even brought in stunt coordinator Ellis Edwards, who's been doing stunt work since the 90s and WCW. Fans have already seen Ellis's work as he organized the ring break with Strowman in The Big Show, and moviegoers will have seen his stunts in The Fast and the Furious 7. With reports that every stunt will be big, though safe, Ellis has his work cut out for him, and fans can see his stunts on July 19th at Extreme Rules The Horror Show. That isn't the only big news for the Swamp Fight match, as it's also being reported that Triple H will play a large part in putting the match together alongside Wyatt himself and Jeremy Borash. Though it's unclear what kind of input the game will have, it's being reported that the match will feature the three faces of Wyatt, namely the Bray who debuted in 2013, the Firefly Funhouse leader, and the Fiend. Given that Strowman won at Money in the Bank, it's expected that Wyatt will win this rematch, leading to a rubber match at SummerSlam where the Fiend could reclaim the gold. That all remains to be seen, but with Triple H, Wyatt, and Borash putting their heads together for the match, fans can expect big things from the Swamp Fight. We've got news from Monday Night Raw now, as one person fans haven't seen for a while is Shayna Baszler. Recently, it was reported that there's currently no plans for the Queen of Spades, but now it seems that there may be some animosity aimed at the former NXT Women's Champion. Fightful is reporting that Vince McMahon has soured on Baszler, which has been a factor in why she hasn't been on Raw lately. And Dave Meltzer also wrote in the Wrestling Observer newsletter, Vince also soured on Baszler completely because he never conceptually grasped the style that an MMA fighter should use in pro wrestling, and she doesn't check his buttons when it comes to women in wrestling. It's no secret that WWE has nixed big plans for Baszler this year, as she was replaced as the winner of the Women's Royal Rumble and Money in the Bank by Charlotte Flair and Asuka respectively. It's also well known that Baszler was a favorite of Paul Heyman, who was looking at building up new stars on Raw, whilst Bruce Pritchard has instead relied on veterans such as The Big Show and Ric Flair. Time will tell whether Baszler ever gets the push that she's been promised multiple times, but it's clear that 2020 hasn't been a good year for the Queen of Spades. Now, earlier this week, NXT superstar Saurav Gurjar possibly spoiled the main event of next week's Great American Bash, and unsurprisingly, this hasn't gone down well. On social media, the Indus Sure member shared a picture from the tapings for next week's show, and since we don't want to spoil the result, we won't say who the picture showed holding the NXT and North American titles. Brian Alvarez has stated that WWE is furious about the leak, as it's been described as just about the most massive mistake that anyone could make. Almost immediately after the photo of the double champion was deleted, NXT superstar EJ Nduka said that the company taped two endings, though many fans aren't buying the story. We can't say for certain whether it'll be Adam Cole or Keith Lee who walks away with all the gold, though one option certainly seems more likely now, but we're pretty confident that Saurav Gurjar won't be challenging for either title for a very long time. Back to Raw now, as the Red Brand tried to film 2 episodes yesterday, but that was easier said than done. According to sources, the company's writing team is a mess right now, as the recent reshuffle with Pritchard replacing Heyman, as well as the taping schedule caused by the ongoing global situation, means that everything is on edge. While WWE was able to tape 1 episode of Raw, that filming didn't end until 1 p.m. Eastern, leaving little time to tape the second show or get it approved by Vince McMahon. One longtime anonymous member of WWE's team said the writing team has completely fallen apart, and added, "There have been some disorganized times in the company's history, but this is a complete lack of anyone having a handle on this or a vision." It was also reported that the boss didn't stick around for both tapings, as he left a little bit after the second episode started filming. It's unknown where he went and why he left, but the company finished tapings as planned without him, with one source saying, "I wish I could have left early." Hopefully it won't be too long until things improve, and fans will have to tune in to the next 2 weeks of Raw to see how the tapings ended up. While we're not entirely sure how the next 2 weeks of Raw will be, we do know of one huge match planned for this coming Monday. In a champion vs. champion encounter, Raw Women's Champion Asuka will face SmackDown Women's Champion / Women's Tag Team Champion Bayley in non-title action. Recently, it was Asuka who helped NXT's Io Shirai defeat Bayley's tag team partner Sasha Banks at NXT's Great American Bash. And whilst Bayley is hoping to get revenge for her friend, she'll have to make sure she doesn't fall victim to the Green Mist too. We are going back in time to May 2000 now, as after months away from the ring, The Undertaker returned as the American Badass. Returning during the Triple H Rock Iron Man match, the gimmick lasted just over 3 years before being buried alive at Survivor Series 2003. Speaking to comicbook.com, the Phenom shared his own thoughts on the character, admitting he feels it was ended early. He said, "I think we could have got a little more mileage out of it, but it was a different variation. It was an older iteration of it. The American Badass has got a few more years on him. He's a little more grizzled even." The American Badass would eventually return for WrestleMania's Boneyard match, and with the dead man seemingly retired, who knows when we'll see the American Badass again. Over to SmackDown now, as 2 huge matches have been set for next week's show. Next week, fans will see Bayley and Sasha Banks face Alexa Bliss and Nikki Cross in non-title action after the former champions interrupted the celebration hosted by Bayley and Sasha Banks. The SmackDown tag titles will also be on the line, as the New Day will defend against Shinsuke Nakamura and Cesaro, following the King of Strong Styles win over Kingston and foiled attempt to put Kofi through a table. Next week's show will also see a replay of the Wyatt-Strowman match from Money in the Bank, as it'll be a stacked show on the road to Extreme Rules, the horror show. Speaking of the blue brand, fans will recall the now infamous segment that saw Jeff Hardy throw his urine on Sheamus from a few weeks back, and now fans know who's responsible for it. Though it's obvious Vince McMahon loved it, Fightful reports that it was Devon Dudley who produced the segment, which was written by creatives Zach Hyatt. An anonymous road writer was also involved for the segment, which originally had the medical professional in the ring named Dr. Kirschenbaum, though that was never referenced on TV. Some fans criticized the angle for being a rehash of a similar 2006 segment with Shawn Michaels, and given that Fox edited the P throwing out of rebroadcasts, it may be another 14 years before we see something like this again. Now, earlier this year, Johnny Walker, aka Mr. Wrestling 2, sadly passed aged 85, and whilst fans knew of his skills in the ring, his personal life remained a mystery. Now, more details from his private life have come out, as it turns out his family went to great lengths to keep his identity a secret, telling all their neighbors that he was a traveling salesman. Walker also had cataract surgery with one of his trademark masks on to conceal his identity, according to Johnny Lee Gayton of the Charleston Post-Courier. Nowadays, there's not as much pressure on masked superstars to keep their identity a secret, and we're wondering what he and his wife said Walker sold other than moves in the ring. Back to the present, and we've got an update from Renee Young, as according to the Wrestling Observer, she's feeling much better after her positive test. Their report also stated that her chest was heavy and she was breathing funny, but is feeling a lot better now than she was before. It's also been noted that WWE officials didn't call to see how she was doing, but that won't stop Young from working to recover, especially after confirming she's got a new cookbook coming soon. Speaking of the company's positive cases, WWE recently did a U-turn on wearing masks, which now come with a fine if you don't wear one inside the Performance Center. PW Insider is reporting that anyone caught not wearing a mask will be issued a $500 fine for their first violation, which increases to $1,000 for further offenses. This is a far cry from Kevin Dunn yelling at people over the PA that if they're wearing a mask they're not a fan, and after Rick Boogas received flack for taking his mask off during tapings, expect all faces to be covered in the crowd from now on. One person fans may not be seeing on TV though is Kairi Sane, as she's been absent for weeks, and this break may be permanent. Sane hasn't been seen since her head was busted open on the steel steps, but before that even happened, there were plans for Sane to retire from WWE and go back to Japan. The Wrestling Observer reported about what plans Sane had, saying, There had been talk that once her contract with WWE was up, that she would wrestle one more year in Japan and then retire. Sane also recently got married, and obviously wants to spend time with her husband, and though we don't know if Sane will wrestle in WWE again, fans shouldn't expect to see her for a while. We're focusing on WWE Champion Drew McIntyre next, as he's taken time out of his busy schedule to take aim at Conor McGregor. Recently, the controversial MMA fighter challenged Vince McMahon to a fight, leading to McIntyre making light of McGregor challenging yet another 70-year-old to a fight, referencing McGregor's ball with a pensioner in a pub. On Twitter, the Scotsman continued, mocking McGregor's photo with the WWE Championship, saying that the Notorious One is just the latest person who thinks that having a PR team that'll put a title on him means something. Our reigning WWE Champion wasn't done yet, as he told him, "Stick to whiskey, McTapper," referring to McGregor's loss to Khabib Nurmagomedov at UFC 229. Over the years, McGregor has teased jumping to WWE on multiple occasions, and whilst we're yet to see the Irishman in WWE, it's clear that Drew McIntyre isn't a fan. Over to AEW now, and even though Chris Jericho may not be Le Champion right now, the Inner Circle member is still a very influential person. It's no secret that Jericho has plenty of pals within the industry, and on a recent episode of his podcast, Y2J revealed just how these friendships helped him boost AEW's roster. He said, "I brought in 5 guys here: Jon Moxley, Dean Malenko, Matt Hardy, Jake Hager, and you. That's it. That's a pretty good track record. It's not like, oh, here's so-and-so that's been on TV once and just sits backstage and eats catering. That's not what you would want or I would want." It's interesting to think what AEW would be like without Jericho, and whether Hager, Hardy, Malenko, and Moxley would have still come, but for now, the Fozzy star will be focusing his attention on Orange Cassidy, who he'll be facing next week. And we're ending with news from WWE, and recently the company had been using a loophole to avoid superstars having to quarantine, but now that's a thing of the past. As several states are refusing to admit people from Florida due to the high number of cases from the Sunshine State, the company had been flying superstars to Philadelphia and letting them find their own travel from there. Now this loophole is over, as Pennsylvania Governor Tom Wolf has announced that individuals traveling from Florida will have to isolate for 14 days, something that the WWE doesn't have the time for superstars to do. If anyone chooses to disobey this rule, they could face a heavy price, as staff could face a $1,000 fine in New York for a first offense, $2,000 for a second, and a whopping $10,000 for subsequent offenses. It'll be interesting to see how WWE reacts to the loophole being closed, but for now, it doesn't look like any WWE talent will be leaving Florida.